All right, so we are recording. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Punk Punk Goose on WMUC FM 88.1 in College Park, Maryland, and welcome to Deathwaves on WGMUradio.com. Today, we have an awesome interview that we're doing. We're going to be interviewing the famous Carl Canedy of the Rods, and not only that, he has also been a legendary producer for Megaforce Records, producing records such as uh, Fistful of Metal, Armed and Dangerous, Spreading the Disease by Anthrax, Violence and Force by Exciter, Field of Fire by Overkill, Beyond the Gates by Possessed, and many other awesome records. How you doing today, Carl?
I'm doing great, Vivek. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So,
So you have to forgive me because ever since I've had COVID, and it's been months, but I was a long hauler, and my voice will just disappear sometimes. So it just disappeared a second ago when I said hi. So just bear with me; it'll come back.
of course, no, I'm a very patient person. I believe patience is a virtue.
Okay.
So yeah. So let's just I want to start off with so a week ago we had the really sad passing of John Zazula, and I know you were really good friends with him. So if you're able to, would you be able to comment on your friendship with John Zazula? Like, how did you meet him, and what was your friendship like, and what was it like working with him on Megaforce releases?
Well, Johnny and I met. I was working at Music America, which is where Metallica did their first album in Rochester, and Chris Bubach recorded the first Raj album. But he's a longtime family friend. His brother and I are best friends. Chris and I are very good friends. So Chris was telling me that Johnny was bringing in a band and he had signed bands. And so I called Johnny and we struck up a conversation and we hit it off immediately and wound up, that's how I wound up producing, for Anthrax for him. Um, but we've been friends ever since. And that's 40 years now, something like that, 41 years. So yeah, very, very sad. My friendship with John was, we've always been we didn't always live near each other, but when he was looking for a house, he came up here where I am in Scranton, Poconos area. And, we spent a couple of days. We went out every day looking at houses and, it was, we stayed in touch, and in the last 4 or 5 years, we spoke 2 or 3 times a week. And so for me, it leaves a really big hole. But John, he was a brilliant man. He was one of those people who was like a Zen type person. He was very cool and very bright, but he also was very kind. And so, even though he might be 5 steps ahead of you, he let you come to it in your own time. He never belittled anybody. He never made them feel like they should have been brought up to speed faster. He was just a really, really good guy. And, it's sad. And Marcia was the same. Marcia was cool. And she was another one who was one of a kind person. So it's very sad that he's gone. And even though I knew he wasn't doing great because we spoke regularly, um, I didn't think it was going to happen this quickly. We hoped that he was going to get more treatments and that somehow things would get better for him. And so sadly, it didn't happen.
Yeah, that is a really sad passing, and that day was a very probably one of the saddest days for heavy metal ever. The influence of John Zazula and his importance to metal is almost like like you cannot understate it. Like he really was an architect and built metal in a way that can
It's
only be respected.
I agree, and I know that I'll probably be criticized, and I'm not trying to liken it to the same degree, but to some degree it is, and that's like the influence that Jimi Hendrix had on guitar playing, and that the Beatles had on music, just the diversity and whatever. And John Zazula bringing the metal he brought. I mean, he brought it to mainstream. A band like Metallica didn't exist. Like when I was doing Anthrax, a friend of mine, I said, "This band's unbelievable. I'm loving doing this record in there," and he said, "It sounds like insect music." And he goes, how big do you think they'll be? And I said, I think a gold or platinum band. And so we had a bet. He goes, it sounds like insect music. It's horrible. They'll never do anything. Because if you remember, it was changing of the guard. John introduced this music. But if you think about the legs that bands that he brought in, Anthrax, Overkill, Metallica, Exciter, on TT Quick, um, just down the line, the influences that it's had on metal and the subgenres, it's unbelievable.
For sure, for sure. So let's talk about your band Canedy. In 2020, your band released your band released Warrior 6 years after Headbanger. So how would you compare the writing and recording sessions for Warrior compared to Headbanger?
Um, Headbanger was an album that I did because I wanted to showcase my songwriting. It was as simple as that. It wasn't really about my drumming. I figured that people who knew me, and it was going to be a small sphere of people who were going to hear my album, I figured they knew I could play drums. But did they know that I actually wrote songs? Did they know that I played guitar, that I wrote the melodies, that I wrote all the riffs? Did they know that? And so I thought, well, I'm going to put an album together of songs that A, I've written 100% of, B, that I owned 100% of, because we did a publishing deal with MCA early on with the Rods. So I wanted to make sure I owned everything. And I even put my demos, I call them my 30-minute demos that I give to the bands when I write a song there. I hack out all the parts and including the drums with the guitars, the bass, the vocals, if there's a little keyboard idea, whatever there is. And it's just a shitty little demo that I give to the guys, which is totally cool because, with the Rods, we've been together 40 plus years. So it's not like it's an embarrassment. They've seen how badly I play guitar and how horribly I sing. So no embarrassment for them, but it gives them a rough idea, the outline. So I included that in my Headbanger album. And it turned out to be a great thing for me. It was a difficult album to do, particularly because I'm so used to producing other people. Now I'm in a situation where I'm producing myself, and I am a bastard to work for. I never realized what a prick I was, but I am. But I was tough to work with, and so I'm such a perfectionist, and I couldn't. Like Rob Reiner, I was talking to Rob about a song called "My Life My Way" on the Headbanger album, and I had written it for my friend Jim Nunes and for my friend Billy Hilfiger, both of whom passed way before their time. And it was an important song to me. I just couldn't get the drum track. Just couldn't get it. Played it 20 times, sucked every time. And so I was talking to Rob and I said, Rob, and so he gave me the producer pep talk. And so I went up and I knocked it out. And, it was really helpful. So the Headbanger album was an album that I just wanted to put together so that I had a collection of my songs. And so people who wanted to see it could see that I actually do write. And all of these ideas that when I have all the Rod songs and other songs for people that I actually do write them. So when it came to Warrior, Warrior was a case of I've been playing in a cover band with Tony Garuba, the bass player in Canedy. We've been playing together for 9 years now, I think. And they had a band called TLC, which I think had a re-release recently on Heaven and Hell Records, and of the TLC record. And they were really great band, but they were working on new material. But their drummer, just because of job commitments, he couldn't make the gig, and they had a local TV show performance scheduled. So they asked me if I would fill in at the last minute, and from there we talked about maybe writing because their drummer was unable to continue, and so that's how Canedy came about. We wrote together, but the guys have worked together so long. They have their own writing process, all different to me, but the result was great. It took a while, but I was really pleased with the end result. And now we're working on new material, and we have 3 songs that we're just in the process of finishing now that are recorded. And it was great, but it was really a case of I really joined a band, even though we just decided to call it Canedy as a continuation of, my Headbanger album. And since that was out, we would just continue with the name. But really, I became part of a band, and I'm fortunate because they're all talented guys and they're really good people.
Nice. So, all right. So, how would you say you approach writing songs for Canedy compared to writing for the Rods?
The Rods, well, for Canedy, we get together. Usually, the guitarist Charlie or the bassist Tony brings in an idea, and been fascinating for me because normally as a producer, I'm hands on with arrangements, I'm hands on with ideas, and in this case with the band, I take a very laid back approach. Excuse me. I will actually suggest something if I really think I'm contributing. But otherwise, I just take our hands off. But Tony will come in with a bass line and some lyrics, maybe in a melody, and it's very bare bones. And then we just start to work on it, and it just comes together as a band. And I love writing that way because we're all involved, and however major or minor a part, it doesn't matter. We're all there working the feel and the whole idea. And I think that's what made the Warrior album great. And I say great in my opinion. Other people may not think it's great, but I think it's a great album. And I'm very pleased with it. I should say I'm very proud of it. And that's how we're writing. And it's very different. With the Rods, David and I write the songs, and then we present them to each other. So they're virtually complete when we give them to them. I mean, it's David will have his ideas. On the last album, Brotherhood of Metal, we collaborated. I had written lyrics for Brotherhood of Metal and had given it to David. He then took it and just killed it on the writing. On another song, like he had, I can't think of the title now, but he had the whole drum part. David started it and Gary started as drummers. So originally they were drummers. So they have ideas. David especially, David's super talented and he'll have ideas. So in that one song, he had mapped out that drum part and I played it exactly what he gave me, his whole drum part. And then on 1982, I wrote the song, but I wrote basically the lead part, the hooks, and he just, except for like little ad-lib solos, but he took my parts, the harmony ideas, and he played those exactly as I played them. So, it's a different animal. And in the Rods, we have a saying that if it's more than 3 chords or takes longer than 5 minutes to learn, it's not a good Rod song.
Wow.
So, and I mean, I'm being facetious, but we joke about it. But there's a little element of truth in that we're a 3-piece power trio, and if the song if it's too many parts and it's too intricate and it's too cutesy and whatever, it's not going to work when you're out there, slamming out a song. It's got to be powerful and strong. And so we've learned what works for the Rods live and on record.
Wow, that's very interesting actually, especially coming from a power trio perspective. So, okay, so I was actually going to ask you what made you settle on the current album lineup instead of like using the guest and session musicians you had on Headbanger, but you already answered that. So what would you say are your influences for Canedy compared to the Rods, and how would you say they have shaped Headbanger and Warrior?
Well, going back to Headbanger, so many people contributed to that album. So many friends of mine, and the criteria was nobody's getting paid because there is no money. So there were a couple of people who wanted to be paid, even though they were friends of mine. They wanted money for an engineer or whatever. And I'm like, well, I can't do it because if I pay one person, I have to pay everybody. So I'm going to be fair across the board. And that's what I was. That's what I did. So my friends contributed, and I was very grateful. John Hahn, Joe Camo, Chris Cafferty, sorry. So many people. I'm trying to think. Mark Tornillo came to my house twice to record in my studio. I mean, drove up from New Jersey. Like, how
Yeah,
great is that?
that album was awesome. I really enjoyed listening to it.
So thank you. And he really, but everybody contributed. Gary Chesick, the guitarist from the Jeffrey James Band,
Gotcha.
he helped me. Just so many people, and I can't name them all because there are a lot of guests on it. Dave Porter sang so well. But anyway, all those people contributed so much. But I think on the new Canedy, I think we've all come from our influences basically show. And I think the Canedy band it's a case of we have a lot of influences that come from the Black Sabbath, Dio, and so on days. But then we also listen to modern music. So I think it's basically some traditional metal, but with a modern approach. Is how I would say about Canedy.
Nice.
So we're true to our roots, but we also are aware of what's happening.
That's
today.
a good way. That's a good way of doing it. I know. Actually, I was reading an interview with Rob Halford of Judas Priest, and he actually said the same thing. As like Priest usually likes to listen to what's going on or what's popular in metal to keep themselves relevant. So that's a good approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right.
And I think you have to be. Sorry, I think you have to be true to yourself. Like you can't. It's not like, oh, it's really popular now, and I'm like I always joke about, I'm going to audition for a K-pop band. It just, yeah, you have to be, you have to do what you do well, play to your strengths, and believe in yourself. And if your music is good, then you'll have an audience. No matter whether you're trying to be trendy or not, you just stick to it. And if it's good, you'll find your audience.
That's true. That's very true. So let's talk about the Rods. In 2019, the Rods released Brotherhood of Metal. How would you compare the writing and recording process for this and Vengeance, the 2011 record, to the original records that you did when the Rods were active in the 80s?
Um, well, Vivek, I have to say that recording Vengeance was a nightmare. It was just a freaking nightmare to record. Ah, it was brutal.
Tell
In the
me.
end, in the end, we got it right for the most part, and and it was good. But when we first started, it was the first time recording digitally, and there were some things that were happening that were awful. And Shmulik Avigal built my computer, and he helped me get set up to record because I played drums on his album. And so it was, we recorded, but then what was happening was when it was being handed off, people would move tracks without realizing. And I didn't realize at the time that I needed to send total waves. Now, when I record, I send completed waves, usually EQ'd to the way I would like to hear them. And then I tell them, do not touch them, do not edit them in any way. If it's not right, send it back, I'll replay it, but do not change it. But what was happening then was things were being cut up, and they'd move a bass drum or something, a guitar part would be played and the guitar might be off a little bit. So, well, let's move the bass drum to match that guitar part. Well, pretty soon it was Swiss cheese. And like, wait, that's not a feel I played. And then like, oh, well, it's too late, we can't go back. And I'm like, oh my God. So I wound up replaying the drums, and we wound up re-recording basically the Vengeance album uh, twice as
Wow.
a result of digital um, ineptitude. It was a mess. It was miserable to do it until we finally figured it out. So when it came to Brotherhood, it was completely smooth. Lonnie Park was working with David on guitars, vocals. Gary recorded there as well. And I recorded my drums at home. There were literally no issues. And it was a smooth process. And, it was fun. Now with this new album we're doing, Shockwave, I have a few more drum tracks to do, but it's smooth. It's so simple.
Nice. So the Rods are working on a new record?
I have 9 songs in my computer, and 3 drum tracks are done. And I'll be knocking out additional soon.
Awesome. So how are you enjoying Steamhammer? I know Brotherhood of Metal is on Steamhammer Records. Are you enjoying that label? Oh,
I'm sorry, what?
oh sorry. I was gonna
No,
say.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. They say, mom always said if you don't have something nice to say, but I do have something
Oh,
nice to say. No,
oh,
this isn't a big. Oh my God, he's gonna say something bad about SPV, Steamhammer. Um, I actually felt that Steamhammer, Ali Hahn, we've had dealings with Ali Hahn in the past where we've tried to work together. He's tried to sign the band, and we've always wanted to work with him. He came to us, and he had some great ideas in that he said, let's update the Wild Dogs cover, which I thought was a brilliant idea. I never would have thought of that. And that was his idea. And then Eric Philippe, who's a longtime friend and phenomenal graphic artist, he did a killer cover for us for Brotherhood, featuring the updated um, Cerebus cover and making them mechanical, which was cool.
that was.
And Ali Khan, he was he was really great in the sense as an A&R person was take the time you need, just make it a great Rods album. So as A&R people go, you don't get better than that because A&R people are either pushing you for a deadline, pushing you in a direction, doing everything you don't want as a band. Not saying that sometimes they aren't right, but for the most part, it's just an intrusion. It's an invasion of your privacy and creativity musically, and it's basically an F off. Like it's our band. We'll work on it. So Alihan was really great. And they did some initial promotion. Ultimately, I felt they dropped the ball on promotion. I know some other bands who've been on the label who have come and gone as we have, um, felt that same way. But that's how it is, and I get it. As a label, we just started a label, Louder Than Loud, Giles Lavery and myself and Bob, and we're running into that same thing where you can only do so much. You can only make so much happen. So actually, very positive about SPV and Steamhammer, and they did a good job. They did a great job producing the album. The vinyl's fantastic, and so overall, I have to say, I would give them an A. Maybe not an A plus, but an A.
That's good. Hey, an A still it's passing with
It
flying
is.
colors.
That's
so
right. That's right.
yeah. Well, I know in the mid to late 2010s, you guys, the Rods decided to reunite. What inspired the Rods reunion?
Um, David and I are like Mick and Keith in that we usually have different versions of the same story, which I find amusing. And I never, when journalists will interview both of us, they'll say, "Well, David had said this, and you said this." I'm like, run them both because I love that whole thing, like with Keith and Mick, where they'll ask a question and Mick will have one answer, and Keith will be just like, "What?" I have no clue, and I love the differences. So, but we got together because our good friend and beloved supporter and benefactor Al Falso passed away, and there was a benefit for Al, and we reunited the band to play that festival or that benefit, and so that went really well, and then David had done a solo album with John West, and that was Third Wish, which was a great album, and I think he was looking to continue that and you know reuniting the Rods, and so was really just a case of I was ready for it, he was ready for it, and we got back together. And I know that I was when we got to the rehearsal hall, I was really concerned that we weren't going to be a reasonable facsimile of what we once were. I didn't want the watered down swing version of the mellow swing version of what the Rods were. Like if we weren't in your face, then I didn't want to do it. And fortunately, when we fired it up, it was like we hadn't stopped playing. So
Hell yeah.
that was exciting. And so that's how that came about, and just proceeded from there. Then we started playing festivals and doing more dates, and
That's awesome. I discovered the Rods pretty late when in my own journey throughout metal. Like I remember seeing one of the reissues for Wild Dogs and In the Raw at my local record store, and I asked, "Hey, who are these guys?" It's like, "Oh no, dude, you like old school heavy metal?" And I said, "Yeah, I love that stuff. Buy it." And I went and bought it, and well, I fell in love. Um, so, given the time that's passed since the original run of the Rods to the current edition of the Rods, how would you say actually, would do you think the songwriting process for the Rods has evolved or matured, and if so, how?
I do think it's evolved. I think we know our strengths now, even from the Vengeance album. I think we know our strengths. We write differently. We write more for what we can perform live and what sounds right for us and feels right for us. And so we know our limitations and we also know our strengths. So we can write to our strengths and avoid our limitations as much as possible. Um, I think lyrically the band has evolved. So we're stronger, and in some cases, mine probably in particular, less embarrassing. And and I think that it's matured, and I think we're better writers now than we were back then, and because we're more focused.
Interesting. Okay. Interesting. A more focused approach to writing. That's really cool. So what would you say like overall what would you say the influences for the Rods are? Because when I listen to all of your records, I hear like ACDC, Motorhead, Thin Lizzy, a little bit of Judas Priest, and some Black Sabbath. But and even honestly, I also hear like stuff that would go on to influence thrash metal too. But what would you say are your influences for the Rods?
I think you nailed that, and I think that what we grew up with, and we grew up with bands like Deep Purple. David toured with Deep Purple with Elf for a year. There's no way that Richie Blackmore is his second favorite guitarist, Jeff Beck being the first. So, we grew up on those bands, Cream, Hendrix, and so on. So those were our influences, and of course later on Black Sabbath, of course, and Dio and so on, and just Judas Priest always, and then AC/DC, very very influential in a lot of ways, and so I still love it. I love all those bands
No,
actually still.
all those bands hold up very well.
Hmm.
I often catch myself listening to Thin Lizzy just driving down anywhere in the morning. They're a great band to wake up to.
Thin
Um,
Lizzy were a great band, and I
yes,
I kind of came to them late because I didn't really, I knew Boys Are Back in Town, and I kind of was limited to that. I didn't really explore anything more. But what a
gotcha.
great band.
For sure. So let me ask you this question because and obviously a lot of the people listening to the show want to know how did the Rods form? What's your origin story?
Um, the backstory on it is that David and Joey DeMeo approached me to play with them. David and Joey had a band called Thunder with the drummer Dave Galutz, great guy, and great drummer. And they had sort of dissolved that band for some reason. But my band, Colakis, which, by the way, side note, Colakis had an album out right before the Rods started, and right when the 1979, at the end of 79, Colakis released an album. And of course, we had broken up by then. And we're now just finishing a full length album. We're almost done with that. I think all my drum tracks are done and on that, and most of it's mixed. So actually, after all this time, 42 years later, comes album two.
Nice.
But yeah, so but anyway, so Colakis opened for Thunder a few times, and we would go see them. In fact, we went to the bass player Lincoln and I went to see them in a theater in Auburn, and they had every Joey and David had every amplifier. They were so mismatched, but there were so many of them. And we're sitting there, and I've worn earplugs since early 70s. And I'm sitting there and I look at Link, and the hiss from the amps was louder than Colakis played. That was the hiss. And I looked at Link and I went, holy shit, that's the hum. I can barely talk to you because of the hum. Wait till they fire it up. And sure enough, so I immediately put my earplugs in. When they fired up, what you saw was the drummer doing this, but you heard nothing. You just saw him killing himself, sweat, drops of sweat flying in the air, and flailing, and no drums at all because the guitar and bass were so loud. And but anyway, so they asked me to play, and so we got together at my house and we did a couple little, like, on my 4 track just to record things, and it was great. It was really great working with both of them. But Joey and David are, you know, slightly different approaches, and so it just didn't work. And then David, we talked about starting a band. David says this because he wanted to make a few dollars. I always wanted to be on a major label. So on one hand, his was like, yeah, we'll get together and we'll make some money and play some clubs. And I'm on the other hand was like, no, hell no, we're going to get a major label deal. So, and then of course Joey started Man of War and invited me to be part of that. So, that was how it all happened. It was all around the same time, and we all of our influences and just wanting to continue to play heavy music.
Nice. So, what are your favorite experiences recording the early 80s Rods albums?
The first album was Steve Starmer, um, which was the Rock Hard album, and ultimately became the Rods. We added 2 songs when Gary joined the band. We went to the studio in Rochester and we recorded 2 songs overnight. Just stayed in the studio and recorded.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's fun to do that. And I did that with the 450s, not that we stayed overnight, but we recorded in the same room. And it's such an experience, it's a great experience. But so back then, we were starving. We would go to Fredonia because Chris Bubach was studying the music program there, and he would get free studio time. So I think at the end of our thing, we had to donate a $1,200 delay line or something to the studios for our studio time that was given to us. We made it a donation, token donation. So, but in the meantime, we were playing gigs. I have a journal that we were on the road for 63 days, something crazy, and didn't come home for 63 days. We were either in a hotel or we were recording. We're traveling to a gig, and we were living on $5 a day. And our bass player, Steve, smoked cigarettes. So he had to buy cigarettes out of his $5 a day. So we would go and, we just, it was, I certainly didn't lose any weight, but nonetheless, it was a tough time on the road. But we all stayed in the same hotel room. We were young, single, and I need I say any more than that. But but it was exciting, and I remember sitting in a tub with a room full of people, but it was late. Everybody was in bed, and I got in the tub, and I was just sitting there, and I was writing lyrics for the last song on the Rods album. The song "In Your Panties" was an idea that I had, and I hadn't shown David yet, and so we had just a few minutes of studio time. Like, well, do you guys have anything else? We're like, no, not right now. And so I went out and played the drums to "In Your Panties," and then showed David the guitar parts. And that's how we did it. And it was a lot of fun because of that. There was a freedom. There were no A&R people. There were no managers. We had nothing. And so it was a total freedom thing. Any deadlines were self-imposed. And so, I would say recording that first album was really a lot of fun.
Nice. What about
even though it was very hard work.
Gotcha. Well, what about recording like the self-titled or Wild Dogs or In the Raw? Any cool stories from those?
Wild Dogs, we went to England to record Wild Dogs. And so we were at Parkgate, which is where Def Leppard recorded Pyromania.
Wow.
I think it's Pyromania. Right after us, in fact. They came in, we were out the door and they were coming in. So England was fun. I loved England. From the time we landed, I knew I could live there. I loved the English people, and I loved the countryside, and I loved London. And it was great. And of course, then we toured with Iron Maiden. And at the end of that tour, then we went back and we mixed the album at the Enid. Have you ever heard of the Enid? ENID?
No, I have not.
They're like an art rock band, and we rented equipment from Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd
Wow.
has a because they had such state of the art equipment, they would actually rent it to studios when they weren't on the road. So we rented some gear from Pink Floyd's studio from people, and we remixed it at the Enid's place. That was one of those. It was like basically a village. It was cold and drafty, and it just wasn't fun to mix in that studio. But Parkgate was great. They're wonderful people, and the Enid were wonderful people as well. But it was a different experience. But the tour with Iron Maiden was phenomenal. They treated us really well.
Awesome.
First night of the tour, they came in with champagne, introduced themselves, and just really good guys. And I used to sit behind Clive. He would be up on the drum riser, and he would look down at me and smile sometimes because I'd go watch him out, watch the shows. And so there was a lot of good memories and a lot of fun, and the crowd loved us, and we got a lot of press. So it was very positive.
That is awesome that you got to tour with Iron Maiden. That is insane to me. Any band who gets to do that, I tip my hat to that. I mean that's an achievement, no matter what era of Maiden. And you got to tour with like the legendary era of Maiden too. That's absolute achievement. Um, so I remember doing a little bit of research on a tour that you did with Metallica and Exciter, Hell on Earth, I believe it's
Mm-hmm.
called. So
Right. The
so
tour that didn't happen.
whoa, okay, tell me everything.
So that tour was set to go, and of course, we don't know the whole story. I don't know the whole story. I know there was a Cliff Burton. There was just a note that his family shared, talking about how when they were done in the studio, they were going to go on tour with Exciter and the Rods. Oops, did I lose you?
No, no, you just turned off your
Oh,
video.
there we go.
Yeah.
So that was set to go. Plane tickets were purchased. We were all set to go. And then Music for Nations pulled the plug on it. And I believe that it was because Metallica had blown up so fast that Metallica didn't need that tour. They were could go on their own. Um, they would sell more records for the company and probably make way more money for themselves. And so that's what happened. But anyway, so they pulled the plug on it, and at the very last minute, we were set to go the next day, and they were just was pulled. Plug was pulled.
Dang.
So, but it would have been a great, because having worked with Exciter, I know those guys, and I'm friends with them, and to this day, and I love those guys. They're like the nicest guys. So it would have been a fun tour, and we did dates with Metallica here in the States, so it just would have been fun.
What are some memories you have of that playing shows with like a really like Metallica in their infancy, essentially?
Um, I just really interacted mostly with Lars, and he was such a great guy. They're all okay guys. They're all good guys, but mostly Lars and I being drummers. I know he borrowed pedals from me for Lemoore's and different things, but a couple of shows. But and Lars came to me when he was talking about they were talking about switching management. When we played a show with them at the Paramount. Is it the Paramount with Vandenberg, Metallica, the Rods, and trying to think who else was on the bill. But so we talked, but simple as that. It was just very casual, just drummers talking.
Gotcha. Right on. So obviously I know with the rods you've done a lot of production for those records. You've also done production on Megaforce releases. So how did you become a producer, and what got you interested in producing records?
Well, from early on, I started from the time I started playing drums was like age 13 when I got my first set of drums after badgering and begging and pleading. I finally got a set of drums, but I also had a guitar around the same time. And so I started playing guitar at the same time. And my girlfriend was in college. And so she and her friend, I got them to take out two mono tape recorders. And so I would hack out the world's worst song. When I say the world's worst song, I'm surprised the Guinness people have not come by to give me the award for worst songs ever written. But so I would strum and hack out a rhythm part, and then I would play it, and then I would try to sing along while it was recording to the next recorder. And it was god awful recording, but it was befitting the kind of crap I was writing. And so I would just bounce them back and forth. So I'd been involved with that from very early on. And of course, by then I was probably 16, but I've always had a propensity to work with arrangements. So I've always had, I've been good with arrangements and ideas. And so it was just a natural fit, but I didn't think about producing until we got to Fredonia, and we didn't have money for a producer. In fact, I'm not even sure that we knew what a producer did back then. Like, we just knew that um, we need, like, David would be out in the studio and working on vocals, and I would kind of vocal coach a little bit, or guitar solos, offer suggestions. And he would do the same for me when I'm doing my drum tracks. And so it just that's how it started. Just learning to produce what worked, what didn't work, and just went on from there.
Gotcha. Nice. So, how would you say your recording and engineering process has evolved over the course of recording the Rods records and Megaforce releases, and has that shaped the way you look and listen to music and how you enjoy music?
Um, I would say that's a good question. I would say that I definitely, as far as listening to music, I've always listened to music and dissected it. And people would say to me after I come out of a studio, 12 hours later, I turn on the radio, like, well, how can you even listen to it? Like, now I can listen to it. I like music and it's different, but I dissect the music, but I still listen to music for passion and pulse and feel. So on one hand, it's very technical in my approach, or clinical, I should say. And on the other hand, I listen to songs and I'm listening for some kind of connection that's organic, and does this move me in any way? And there's so many songs that do. And so, you know, a lot of times you're caught up in the music, and so you don't dissect them. But then there are other songs that I listen to. When I listen to a country song, I'm always amazed at the sounds, the performances, and also the vocal layering. They layer in so many vocals, and you just can barely hear them. And if you took them away, you would notice that they're gone, but you don't really know they're there. So I listen to that from more technical or clinical approach. So on one hand, production has gotten me to a point where I hear things that a lot of other people don't hear because I tune into them, but it's never made a difference in terms of how much I love music and my musical listening enjoyment.
Gotcha. And understood. So let's talk about Anthrax. I know you produced Fistful of Metal, Armed and Dangerous at Spreading the Disease. How did you get to produce these records, and what were your experiences like working with the young Anthrax?
Well, initially we met after I'd spoken to Johnny, and we wound up in a studio in Elmira that didn't really wasn't really right for them. So we wound up in Ithaca at Alex Perialis' studio, and but they were young, and I think initially it was trying to get them to play together and tighten up the guitars and you know the whole 9 yards. I had asked Dan Loper to learn to play with a pick, and
Really?
yeah, because he was so great, such a great player, and of course being able to play with pick and fingers, that's the whole arsenal for a bass player, and which he did, and he thanked me a few years ago, which I was shocked because I'm sitting down and Dan's really tall, and he comes up to me and he goes, "I want to talk to you." I'm like, shit, what did I do now? Like, probably bring up something from 35, 40 years ago. And he just said, "I have to thank you. You told me I had to play with a pick, and it just changed things for me." And it was very kind. He's a very soft spoken, intelligent guy, and very, very kind guy. But anyway, early on, they just needed to kind of fine tune it. They were a young band, and studio is a whole different world. You're under a microscope in the studio, and working on arrangements, but we had to work quickly. And but the band, that band came in fully formed. I was always impressed with them because I saw their hunger and their take no prisoners attitude about getting to a major label and becoming a major band, and I recognized that I had that same thing in myself. And so that was that first album. The second album, when they brought in a singer, and
Joey Belladonna from Neil Turbin.
well, right, no, from yeah, when they had fired Neil, who's a
Yeah.
phenomenal singer. Neil sang his balls off on that album, and
Yeah.
yeah, but there was an issue with the guys that I mean, I don't really know what exactly, but I know that there wasn't a good chemistry with them. But it certainly was not because Neil wasn't a fantastic singer. I mean, you listen to Neil now; he's a phenomenal singer. 40 years later, 35 years later, whatever it is, um, he's just a phenomenal singer. Always has been. So, but anyway, they brought in a different singer, and we spent a week working with him. And so, I just said it's not going to get you to a major label. And so they said, "Get Johnny on the phone." And I called John and told him. And he said, "We'll put the guys on the phone." And so they went into the conference room, and 5 minutes later, they came out and said, "John wants to talk to you." And I'm, wow, that was fast. And so I came back and I picked up the phone. I said, "Hey, John, what's up?" And he said, "Put him on a bus," and hung up the phone. That was it. The singer was gone. So we're in the studio with no singer. So I'm like, okay. But they had the balls to realize that rather than forge ahead with somebody who was not going to do it and make them mediocre, and that's not saying he wasn't a great, the singer wasn't good, and he went on to do some things. Um, but at the time, he wasn't right for that band. And so it was a ballsy move on their part. So that's when I started reaching out, and I called my buddy Andrew Duck McDonald from the Thrasher Project and Blue Cheer and Kim Simmons, and he suggested I give Joey Belladonna a call. So I did talk to Joey. We brought him in, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of like those three releases in particular, those would really go on to, influence and shape the way that we all look at metal, and you are a huge contributing factor to that. So thank you.
Well,
Uh, so
thank you for that. Thanks.
no problem. Uh, any so any funny memories from Anthrax that you would like to share of the sessions that you did with them?
Um, there were a lot of good times, a lot of funny times. Um, but the one thing I always remember, I remember a lot of things, but I just remember, you have to remember that for anybody who's into metal and into speed and thrash metal, at the time they did Gung Ho, there were almost no bands approaching that speed and double bass playing. And Charlie came in and we're getting ready to do the song. And it's like, okay, let's run it down. One take, blew it out. We were blown away how fast he played double bass, consistent, fast, and just one take. So I was like, wow, unbelievable. And as a drummer, it just, I'd always had respect for Charlie. I told him early on, you're going to be a very revered drummer. You'll be the modern drummer guy,
Yeah.
and which he was or is. But it's one of the memories I have of just watching this great band unfold and being part of just trying to help them capture that energy.
Nice, nice. So, uh, okay. So let me see what other questions I have, and obviously, yes. So how did you get to record Exciter's Violence and Force? What were your initial impressions of Exciter?
Um, Powerful. Dan Beeler, besides being an amazing drummer, is just an incredibly powerful singer. I mean, I can't believe that Dan can sing and play at the intensity he does both, um, and get through a show. I mean, he's unreal in that. Almost like the physicality of it all. People don't understand like how hard it is to sing sometimes. Just the breathing aspect and how well that affects your body. And of course, playing drums is also another Olympic event. And he does both full tilt. But when I first heard them, I just thought, wow, they're so powerful. Alan's bass was so heavy. John Ritchie's guitar was, again, very heavy. And Dan's vocals, they were fantastic, and they were different from other bands and because of Dan's vocal. So, and they're also the nicest people. They're Canadian, eh? They have to
Yes.
be nice. It's a law in Canada. You have to be nice if you're Canadian. It doesn't matter. You can be hating on people, but hey, okay, eh? And they're very nice.
Awesome. So how was the recording experience for Violence and Force, and what did you learn from it?
Um, I think the biggest takeaway for me on that was that at the time, John really wasn't the best at doubling his rhythm parts, which is something I wanted to do. And so I tried to do that with like artificially, like people do now. People do this exactly today. There are devices out where you duplicate your guitar and make it sound double. I did that, but I wouldn't have done that. I would have probably spent more time with him working on doubling the parts. So it was a fatter guitar sound. And or I would have recorded him with in a different way. I would have recorded him with a mid-side setup, microphones, more ambience in the room, similar to maybe how Eddie Van Halen recorded the guitars. I might have done something like that so we could capture what he was playing and really have a heavy sound with it. So that was probably my takeaway from that.
Nice, nice, awesome. So so I'm trying to think. Sorry, excuse me. So, and I obviously know you still keep in touch with Exciter after the recording sessions. You're still good friends with all those guys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So what about Field of Fire by Overkill? What did you think of those recording sessions and working with them compared to Anthrax?
Different animal, totally different animal. Um, Overkill were great. Blitz is, look at the band to this day, just like Anthrax. the years have passed, but the band, if you saw the band today, you wouldn't think that, oh, these are guys who've been doing this for 35 years. They're all at the top of their game as they were in the beginning. So, I mean, that's how Overkill arrived. And, that's how they are now. They've just evolved. The writing is better, and the performances are better in certain ways. But, so they came in pretty much fully hatched. We really didn't do a lot. And I just did my best to capture what I could for them on the recording.
Nice. So let's go to the most extreme record you produced, which is Beyond the Gates by Possessed. What were your first impressions of Possessed, and like, did you listen to Seven Churches before doing the recording sessions for Beyond the Gates?
I did not. I did not. Um, which was probably foolish, but I did not. I wrote a little intro for them, which, from what Jeff tells me, they still use it live. Um, Debbie Abono was their manager. And so we did pre-production at their house, at Debbie's house, where I stayed, and they were amazing. And I think my biggest regret in that is that they were young. We did this on Easter vacation. Like, it wasn't like they were in school.
Oh yeah.
So, but they couldn't really, like, I tried to use a click track, but they played well together and they were very tight, but they would fluctuate in rhythm, but they did it together perfectly. And so my mistake was trying to flatten that out. And what I should have done was put them all in the room, excuse me, instead of doing overdubs, put them in a room and let them just blast it out. The way I did Blue Cheer, let them just play live together 100%. And so I was too hung up in the technology, and that's a big regret for me. Although Jeff forgives me because we focused on the vocals quite a bit, and was happy with that. So,
That's
but it was
good.
interesting to hear them because they were different from any band I'd ever worked with.
Well, you definitely. I mean, like Possessed were the band that basically named death metal, and obviously they started an entire different movement, just like Anthrax did, but on a much more extreme and just more harsher and brutal scale. You know.
Mm-hmm. And
So
Jeff recently told me that it was the top selling Possessed album by far.
wow, interesting. Huh? I didn't think so. I thought Seven Churches would be, but I guess after the hype of Seven Churches, everyone bought Beyond the Gates.
Mm-hmm. I was
Um,
surprised too. I
yeah,
just
that
learned this recently.
wow. So how did you end up recording Burning Star by Hellstar? Because I absolutely, when I found out you were the producer of that record, I didn't know that. So I want to ask you about that because I absolutely love Hellstar.
Um, my boys, they call me dad. I call them son. They call me dad. And my friend Mary, who was with us for that, they call her mom. But I was asked by Walter O'Brien, who was at Combat, their label, to accompany him to Texas. And it was basically to be a liaison between the label and the band, because a lot of times, especially way back, I think labels who were the suits, quote unquote, um, didn't know how to relate to these long haired hippie types that playing that loud music. And that Walter is totally cool. Walter managed Pantera. Walter was a total. I'm not mimicking or imitating Walter in any way. I'm just saying that was the suits liked. Somehow they wanted to bridge that, and so I was asked to go with Walter to Texas and just be like the liaison. So in that sense, I showed up and I saw that the only way uh, that I had to step in. And so right from pre-production on, um, we just started working and got along well with the guys. They're still consider them, like I said, they're my boys. In fact, on the wall over here, I'm just going to show you quickly.
Awesome sauce.
See this? See that little flying V right there? The red
Yes,
one?
yes, I do.
Okay, that was Larry gave me that. I brought that home on the plane. So
That is a
that's my.
very that's a very pretty looking flying V too.
It is. It actually sounds great. It has a DiMarzio in it,
Nice,
but I don't. Obviously, it's a wall hanging for me now. But my son gave me that.
nice.
But my boys. But anyway, they when we went to the studio, and there were a couple of the engineer was like trying to pull some stuff, and so I tried to work with that and just stood up for the guys, and we recorded. But it was quick, but it was they were a talented band. James obviously is a
Oh yeah,
killer singer.
amazing singer, amazing,
Mm-hmm.
amazing singer. Hellstar were. I was able to see them once at a local VFW post. It was a last minute show, but I'm very happy I saw it because that was probably like just to see James Rivera just have that very powerful voice just blast me away at point blank range was incredible to say the least.
Yeah, no doubt. And so that's how they came about. It was not like, oh, they want Carl to produce the album, or I want to produce Hellstar. It was just, hey, you want to come with me? And I love Walter. Walter and I are still friends, and I just think he's a great person. So when he asked me to go, I thought, well, yeah, I'll go. Free trip to Texas.
Yeah, why not? Why not? No,
And
I mean it.
it was really cool because I'm really into different cultures and experiencing some of those things. And when I lived in France for 3 months, doing the Ret Forcer and doing that festival we did, I didn't speak French, and so I would be on my own. Like I took like $100 in francs and held it out when I was buying gum. They could have given me some coins and a few dollars, and I would have thought, oh, that was my change. I could have gotten like 650 back from my 100 for a pack of gum, and I would have gone, thank you, merci. And so, in fact, when my daughter was 16, I took her to France and England, and I wanted her to meet my friends. Uh,
Nice.
because obviously we're still close. I just went there a couple of years ago for a party they had, celebration of life, but made great lasting friendships there. But I wanted her to experience what in America a lot of times we're just so intolerant, and to experience what's this like when you go out on the street. I would try to explain to her, and then I let her experience it for herself. Where are we going? Here we are. What's that sign say? Is that in? Does that say out? Is that exit? Does that say danger? Does that say whatever? Where and to experience that where you are on your own. And if you have to ask somebody for directions or some help, if they're rude to you, you're done. It's a horrible feeling, horrible experience. And so I wanted her to experience that. And because in America, we have such a freaking intolerance for people who don't speak English. And so, anyway, with Hellstar, it was cool because I love Mexican food. So they took me to this place in Houston, and it was in a Hispanic neighborhood where we sit down. The menu was in Spanish. The waiter servers, they spoke Spanish. They didn't speak any English, and it was a cool thing. And I had to ask them, eat what's this, what's this. But it was a great experience to be in that kind of a cultural environment here in America, where it's totally different, where I didn't speak the language. But I think it's important to kind of embrace the differences. And in Europe, that's how it is. In Europe, when we went to France, and I'm doing that rambling thing, Vivek, you said that I
Keep
can
keep
do.
going. Keep going. Keep going.
So in France, we all arrived in Entourage, and I was so we were left there on our own, and our hosts were trying to talk to us, so they didn't really speak English, and I didn't speak French, but I spoke slowly and I was polite, and so we communicated, and that's the key. The key is to not make people feel uncomfortable, and you just kind of work through it, and you get to a place where you can communicate as long as everyone's tolerant and working toward that common goal. So, but anyway, with Hellstar, it was great, and it was great Mexican food. I mean, we're talking. When I was 9, I lived in California from 9 to 11. So California, great Mexican food. So I had Mexican food, authentic Mexican food when I was very young. And then coming back east, I'm like, I don't get any of that. You know, I'm like, where's that shit I ate in California? That was really good. So to actually go to an authentic Mexican restaurant, like, oh, great.
I'm back. I'm back where I belong.
Yeah,
So,
no, it's a great experience.
oh, of course. Well, let me talk about one of the more obscure records you've produced, EXC Stricken by Night. How did that happen, and what were your lasting impressions on that record?
Great guys. In fact, those that album is going to be re-released, and I believe that
Is it High Roller that's doing it?
um, well, until it comes out, I don't want to say, so I'll pass on that. Uh, but I did just get a call, and the guys are working on what looks like it may be another. There may be uh, a bonus song
Oh,
on the reissues. Yes, which would be very cool. So the that was a David Carpin band. David Carpin had Shatter Records, and David Carpin, he had signed some really good bands. He found some talent, but what happened was he went out of business, and I wound up having to take over everything. I had to fund everything. Um, that's how I wound up with Apollo Raw. I was producing them, but I also wound up just having to buy everything and pay for everything. Um, and that's the same thing with EXE. You know, EXE was a Shatter band, and it just wound up in my lap. David even wound up bouncing a check to me,
nice.
which was I was disappointed because I thought we were friends, and it was just not very polite. So I took him to court, and this is a good lesson for everybody. So I it was in Cortland, New York, and instead of saying that he gave me the check in New York City, which is where he resided, um, I don't know where he resided now. And David, if you listen to this, I have no hard feelings. You can call me. Um, I don't have anybody out looking to break your thumb for the money you owe me. But the I had it in Cortland County, and so I go through this whole thing, and I was now living here in Pennsylvania, and I would drive up for like a 7:30 a.m. call for court, and we get there, and he doesn't show, of course, and so go through. So I win a judgment for him, and then so when all is said and done, and I've spent money on these things and traveling and all that, and then they tell me that, and this is the lesson for you kids, make sure you do it where they reside so they'll go after them potentially, which of course in New York City they wouldn't have. But anyway, the way this works is if David Carpin is driving through Cortland County and on 81, if you look at that, that's about Cortland County, it lasts for maybe a quarter of a mile on 81. So 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, quarter of a mile, very fast, right? Gonna go by in a heartbeat. But if they catch him, if they happen to stop him in that quarter of a mile and they run his license and it comes up, I'm going to get paid. So
Nice.
there you go. No, it's just like Dumb and Dumber when
Yeah.
he's hitting on the woman and he's like, well, you know, and she goes, is there a chance? Yeah. Is there a chance? Just tell me, like, tell me. One in a million. Ah, so you're saying there's a chance. That's me. Oh, so I've got a chance.
That's funny. I mean, that's not funny, but wow. Oh
It's just
man.
another music business story. Live and learn.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, wow, that is, huh, interesting.
But
Actually,
EXE, they were fun to work with. They were great guys. I really enjoyed working with them.
nice. Well, what did you think of, like, musically, what did you think of them when compared to, like Possessed, Anthrax, Excite, or Overkill? Like, I know, because that, at that point, that was like, what, 1980, 86, 87 when that album was released?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
like that's so late to the game that like in a way it's like I shouldn't say B level, but it's definitely not at the same tier as the bands that we just mentioned. But were you still able to find a lot that you enjoyed out of it?
I did, and I have to say, initially, I thought that it was derivative. Um, I think your comment about a B level, that's uh, a fair assessment in one way. But what I found with the guys was a sincerity and a passion. So the sincerity and especially the passion they brought to it was was what made it for me. Like, okay, these guys really believe in it, and it's almost the homage, if you will, or homage, whichever way you prefer to say it. I get when I say homage, or my friends will go, it's homage. So I'm like, okay, for my friends, I'm going to say homage. But anyway, it's basically like a little tribute as well, in one sense, to their influences. And isn't it that the way for all of us? Like even with Canedy, or that we love Black Sabbath, so you're going to hear some Black Sabbath influences creeping in, or Dio, or whatever. When I'm playing drums, you're going to hear, because I studied with Carmen Appice and Tony Williams, and because I loved Ian Pace and so on, you're going to hear little things in my drumming, and it's derivative, and it's second rate by sure my performance of their licks, but nonetheless, it's a tribute. So yes, that was the common ground I was able to find with the band.
Nice. That's good that with you were able to connect with them on that passion, like the passion you have for recording, the passion they have for just making thrash metal. Um, so so out of all the classic, well, actually, before I even talk about that, tell me about Blue Cheer. What's the story on that? Because I tried research. My only research on it is just you produced that record. Like to produce like basically a proto metal band. What was that like for you?
Well, it was an honor for me. And when I first, like, I used to watch American Bandstand, and because I'm so old, that when I watched bands, it was like I would try to watch drummers, because there was no YouTube. So I would watch Ed Sullivan, I would watch Dick Clark, American Bandstand. I would watch these shows, and so I would watch them, and that they would show just brief clips of the drummer, and so I'd be looking, what's he have for cymbal stand? What's he have the cymbal toppers? What are they like? What kind of cymbals is he using? How does he have his drums? Oh, he has a single bass, only one head, but he's got a pillow in it. And you're getting glimpses. The band is on for maybe 2 minutes, and you're getting a fraction of that to see the drummer. So for me, I was basically a top 40 guy. I hadn't really been exposed to heavy music, and Summertime Blues came on American Bandstand, and I went, oh, wait. So it's not just deep, 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 deep. I love you. I love you. It wasn't Barney music anymore. Suddenly it was blow your TV set up. And so seeing Blue Cheer, that changed things for me. And so at that point, I got another bass drum. And so the world changed for me. But so working with Blue Cheer, because I bought all their albums and listened to them extensively, um, it was a real honor to meet them. I loved Dickie. I loved Paul Whaley. And of course, um, Lee, the guitarist, wasn't there, but they had a really good guitarist with them. And of course, I can't think of his name. I'll think of it in a minute, maybe. But working with those guys, it was fascinating because they were, not only did I love the guys and, love them to the end, but they're originators. There was no, for those guys, there was no, they were the prototypes. There was nobody they copied. Paul Whaley's drumming, Dickie's playing. Dickie was a really good, solid bass player. He had a clean, powerful tone. His vocals were balls to the wall. And so working with these guys and watching them, um, it was amazing to see how they approach things. And Paul Whaley had a lot of self-doubt, but ultimately telling him that, you are an originator. You just need to play what you play. You don't need to try to imitate or try to emulate what people are doing, what drummers are doing now. You're an originator. You don't need to be a follower. So, but it was great to see them work. It was also great to see. It was not great to see. It was sometimes painful to see what time and addictions can do. Paul struggled with heroin addiction, and so even though he wasn't doing heroin at the time, he would have bouts of depression, and that was sad. And Dickie came in one night, and it's hysterical, but it was sad. He had a bottle of gin, and there was about, out of the quart bottle was about this much left of it. And I would think it was 7 or 8. We were going to do vocal session that night. And he came in and he was ready. I'm ready to sing, Carl. And I'm like, holy shit, you can't even talk. I'm like, Dickie, we're gonna, you're slurring your words and blah, blah, blah. Like, we'll do this vocal. Tonight's not a good night. Let's do it another. We'll do it tomorrow. And so that's how, that I just enjoyed it. And they also I had to advocate for the band in the sense that Paul Curcio was supposed to be co-producing with me. Paul Curcio did not co-produce, and I'm going to say this on the record. Um, he did not co-produce. He wasn't even there. I worked on all the arrangements with the band. In fact, at one point, his office was around the corner from the studio we were working in. And they have a very long song. It's a biker song, and I can't ride something. But anyway, it was taking forever for them to get it. They just couldn't get through it. And ultimately, we wound up cutting 2-inch tape. The first time I've ever cut 2-inch tape, because we did 2 long takes of it. And the second half of one was better than and vice versa. So we had a good first half and a good second half, 2 different takes, and we spliced them together, and that's what you hear on the album. So Paul Curcio comes in and he goes, look, this is taking too long. He had nothing to do with the recording whatsoever. But now he's like, oh, this is taking too long. Just move on. Just take it. Don't worry about it. And Chris, the engineer, had the talk back on because he thought that Paul was going to talk to the band. And in fact, Paul was talking to me, and he said, look, they're not very good. They're not going to get through it. They suck. Just let them get through it and tell them it's good enough. And so, those guys, Dickie is he's a Hell's Angels boy. Like he didn't take any prisoners, right? So that was it. Like downstairs he comes, and that was it. Studio door was locked from that point on, and Paul wasn't even allowed to come into the control room ever again.
Wow.
Done. Yeah. And but I was like, hey, they can do it. We're going to make it happen, and we did, and we got great performances. Ultimately, we had to do it in 2 takes, take 2 takes, but we got it, and it was a cool performance. So, but I have great memories about it, and I love working with the guys. And when I recorded Possessed, I went to Dickie's house, and with Cliff Coltrari, and from the label, and we went there and we hung out, and it was fun. And Debbie Abono was there, manager for Possessed. She came, and
Nice.
it was very cool.
Nice. So out of all the classic thrash metal releases, which band, and what release was your favorite to work on, and why?
I would say Spreading the Disease, because my involvement with it, because of watching this band, this talent come to fruition, knowing that they were going to go on to be a huge band, that everything had solidified with Joey and the music and the way it was turning out. It was the most rewarding.
Awesome. So so I'll ask this, but I think I know the answer. Which band did you sense would have the most longevity at the time?
I would say Anthrax,
Okay, that
definitely.
that makes sense to me. So I guess like for all the thrash metal, so for all the thrash metal that you recorded and all the just other forms of metal and rock that you recorded, how would you say that influenced the way you record Rod's records now, or even back in the 80s?
Um, I would say it didn't really influence me other than my learning experience of engineering and producing. But, the rods are, David and I have been together now, like what, 41 years, 42 years. And so we really have uh, a way of working. And so it's our own way of doing things. We're very comfortable. We click. We don't have to, we go into rehearsal, we knock it out fast. And we always joke about it. We have to hurry through rehearsal because David has a restaurant called the Hollywood, which is a fantastic Italian American restaurant.
Where is it?
And it's in Cortland, New York. And it's a great restaurant. And so if you're passing through on 81, it's right off 81, but it's a great family restaurant. And so we always joke, like, come on, we got to hurry up and finish so we can go eat. We have a great relationship in terms of working, and we just are, we don't have to communicate with words very much. He'll play a riff, I'll have an idea, we each get it right away. um, it's just a very simple and fun way to do it. It's so natural for me. I say it's like breathing, because it's just, you don't even think about how well it goes. So we just have our own process, and it really hasn't been influenced by anybody
Nice.
for good, for better or for worse.
That's good. I mean no, and that is good. Like to me, the most important thing a band can have is an identity. It doesn't matter if you're the most original thing, it doesn't matter if you're the most derivative thing. As long as I can find what you are trying to prove or what you want to stand for in terms of your music, that's all I care about.
I agree with you.
That
Vivek, I feel the same way. You have to have your own identity, and that's critical. And I had to make peace with that when the Rods came back to when we reformed. There's so many drummers who play at such high BPMs and are so talented, and I had to sort of make peace. Like, you know what, I can only play what I play, and that's my style. So if I start chasing something that isn't my style, it's not going to wind up in a good place. But I found that on tour, these young bands and drummers who were phenomenal saw something in me that they gave me respect. They're like, wow, their approach, and you're this. And so there was a real brotherhood of the drummers. We all supported each other, and it bridged the age difference. And it was just about the drumming and just the love of drumming. And so that was a huge thing for me, to feel like, yeah, when I play drums now, when I record, I don't think about, oh, is somebody going to think this is a cool lick? Or I have a really cool, fast lick that I could put in here, but it's not right for the song. So, you know what? When I was younger, I would have forced that square peg into the round hole. But now I'm like, you know what? At this age, I've done so many albums. If people don't know I can play drums, then they're never going to. So why not just play for the song? And so that's what I do.
gotcha.
And then when
So
there's an opportunity to play a fast fill, I play it.
that's good. Where where would you see the place of Rods in the terms of like heavy in terms of hard rock and heavy metal? What do you think the Rods' place is if you want to put a place for the Rods?
That's a hard, like, that's writing history. And I know that for some people, the Rods have significance in being part of the new wave of British heavy metal, but it's really not our place to decide that. We are, I think it was in Encyclopedia Metallica,
Encyclopedia Metallum. That's how I did my research on
Metallum.
you. That and
Oh, okay.
Discogs.
So, but in that that I think we're a cult, achieved cult status. This was early before we reformed. But I would say the band we have loyal, dedicated fans, and I'm so grateful for that. So I don't know how the history books will remember us, but I do know that for us, having those fans has been huge. And to put that into perspective as to why that's so important is because our manager at one point told us that, quote unquote, I'm not sure if I can say the word, but I'm going to say it. Um, Nobody gives a fuck about the Rods, is what he told us. And this was before the internet. So then once I started getting emails from fans around the world. And suddenly, we're going to Norway to play. And we made great friends with um, Hans Daka, and we love our friends in Norway. But pretty soon, we're traveling to different countries, and we have fans everywhere. And so we went from nobody gives a fuck about the Rods. I said it again, sorry.
You're good.
And and going to that, from that to, wow, we have fan base around the world. It may not be, Judas Priest fan base, but it's a fan base, and these fans love the Rods, and they care about us. And that's how we feel. We care about our fans, and a lot of our fans have traveled with us. They've come out, and they would just go with us from different countries and travel, and it's been awesome to have friends around the world. And now I do have genuine friends around the world, and I care about them, and they care about me as people, but they also love the band. And that was how the friendship formed, was because of the love of the band. So that's more important to me, that our fans are there, and that we continue to put out music that they will enjoy. And the history books will have to write themselves. And
Fair enough. Fair enough. Uh, so I guess another follow up question for that in terms of the history books, like in the grand scheme of just metal, what would you say your place is as a producer?
Well, that's a great question. Never thought of it that way. I think that I think my strengths have certainly been in capturing the energy of young bands because that's been my focus as my for my band. It's hard to transmit and translate that energy of a live performance to a recording to get that sense of urgency and power. And so that's been one of the things I think I've done somewhat successfully. I think I was able to do it with Anthrax, pull it together and make sure that they sounded powerful and tight, because every little flaw you hear. So I think that's probably been one of the things I've done as a producer that I'm proud of. As far as the rest goes, I really don't know how to answer that, but it was a great question.
Right on. Well, that's basically all the questions I have. Thank you, Carl, for taking the time out of your day to come let me badger you with as many questions as I could.
Vivek, I love this. There were great questions. I really enjoyed this, and I was able to babble. And I love hearing myself talk, so this was perfect for me.
Awesome. Well, that's it for Punk Punk Goose on WMUC and Deathwaves on WGMEradio.com. Enjoy the rest of your night, and that's it.